guys, I'm Chantel with Wildberry Studio, and today I'm going to be painting this little bird. And if you'd like to paint with me, that would be great. I'm going to make this real time so that you guys can attempt to follow along. Now, before we start, I'm going to talk about what paints you're going to need. All right, so obviously you can use whatever colors and brands that you want. I am using mostly Winsor & Newton, and today I think I only used Winsor & Newton on this. So I used Permanent Matter Deep, Burnt Umber, Scarlet Lake. I think I used a little bit of Perylene Violet. This is Cobalt Turquoise. I used a small amount of this, and I really wasn't concerned with keeping it clean. In fact, I kind of wanted it to get a little bit murky or a little bit mixed with other colors to dull it down some. So don't worry about that. It's kind of a light color and it murkies up pretty easily. Oh, and I used a little bit of Winsor Yellow. For some of the gray areas or the backgrounds, I have a tendency to just grab from places on my palette where it's gotten a little bit grayish toned. And I tend to like to do that better than having an actual gray on my palette. I feel like it adds some levels of variance and a little bit more character to it. So you won't end up with just a solid single color layer in there. You get kind of a more interesting wash, I should say. So like I would pull from this area or this area or maybe this area where it looks just a little bit grayed. Or maybe I just mix all of this up together and pull a little bit from there. So I challenge you to look at your palette and not wash it. As you can see, I don't typically wash my palette. If I need a clean spot and I don't have one, then I will, just wet down a rag and wipe a little bit of a space out and then continue from there. So, but I find that that really helps with getting more interesting colors and having just a little bit of a variety to each color that you lay down. So you're not just laying down, phthalo blue. You're laying down phthalo blue that has, a little bit of this teal into it and a little bit of, turquoise or, Payne's gray, or I think I've got some cinnabar in there. You get the idea, but it just makes it just makes things a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. So enough rambling, let's jump into this. All right, I'm just going to jump right into this by adding some of those gray tones that we talked about earlier. And I'm really just going through and painting around everything that I want to have be the main focus. So all of the background is just getting painted right now. And don't worry about if you pick up a little bit extra of some other color that's not gray. I actually think that that adds some extra character and interest, because honestly, if you're looking at things in nature, you're going to see all different colors behind things, and it's not unusual to see a pop of something brighter or completely different. I'm going to link my inspiration picture in the description box below, so make sure you check that out. This is actually from a picture of a bird that I found over on Pixabay, which is all like royalty free use pictures, and I tend to find most, if not all, of my inspiration from there. Okay, not all of it. Some of it are pictures I've taken myself, but I do really like using their site to find things. Not sponsored, by the way. So you can see I like to use a flat brush to do all of this background painting. I know that it might be tempting to use something small to get in there and do the details, but I really think it's helpful to paint more loosely when you're using something that is a little bit larger brush. And I will definitely say that, when I first started painting, I was wanting to use just tiny little brushes to get at all the details, but I don't think things look as good that way. I really do think that using a larger brush does help to bring everything together and make it less overworked and more natural and loose feeling. Loose in a good way. Now, that being said, if I'm painting the background around something and there's a lot of really intricate spaces to paint in, I will grab something smaller to get at those little details, but I will try to do what I can with this long flat or this large flat angle brush. I think this is, I don't know, I think it's an 1 inch or a 3/4 inch brush. I will link it down in the description box below, along with as much of the other supplies that I've used as possible. And remember too that as you paint this, everything's going to lighten up as it dries. That that really can't be stated enough because I think that if I went back into this one again, I would try to make the background just a little bit darker because I like the tone that it's at right now. And I but it still came out really nice and in person it looks you can see all that detail. Now, while this is all wet still, it's not soaking wet, it's more so at a damp stage. I'm going to go in and start adding some of the branches that I want to be in the background. So there's two main focal branches, and I'm leaving those until later. The ones I'm putting in now are just in the background, and I'm wanting to do this not on soaking wet paper. It's really, I do want the paper to be damp though. If you do it on soaking wet paper, it's going to completely bleed out. It's just going to wash right into the background. And if you do it on dry paper, you're going to get much sharper edges. So the damp paper makes it so that it just kind of fades into and becomes part of the background. And it gives it a lovely soft edge. And I'm just using the burnt umber right now for this color, for these branches. There might be a little bit of maybe a little bit of raw umber mixed in, but I believe this is mostly just burnt umber. And then I think there's a little bit of perylene violet for this up here because you really want to vary your branches. You don't want them to all be the same color. And I'm just kind of switching between that perylene violet and the burnt umber. I'm also varying the amount of water that I'm adding to the paint so that I get a little bit more or less saturation of color. But I'm not going in with very wet water or very wet paint. If you do that, you're going to oversaturate the damp paper and it's going to create blooms, which can be useful, but not really the look that we're going for in this picture. If you're enjoying this video or you find it helpful, now would be a great time to hit that like and subscribe button. I really would appreciate it. It definitely helps me out and helps my channel to grow and encourages me to put out more videos like this. So now I'm going in and I'm adding a little bit of that Payne's gray, and I've got just a hint of the Perylene Violet, or really you could do this with some of the Permanent Matter Deep. There's the Permanent Matter Deep right now. But I'm just wanting a little bit of brown into the sides of that bird. And of course, that Payne's gray I had washed down very heavily because it is pretty strong when it's at full strength. We're just going in lightly right now. Now, some people tend to paint more in washes and they'll do layer one wash over another. And I've discovered that's not really my painting style. I more so just like to throw lots of, you know, all the colors I want on the page at once and do it in chunks. So, there's no rules. Do what you like. So this is definitely more of that Permanent Matter Deep that I'm adding in at a more saturated, thicker consistency right now. And I've got, I believe, a little bit of the burnt umber mixed in there just to make it not quite as red. What I really like to do is when I have a color on my brush of a certain, consistency, I like to go through and paint as many different areas as I see that need that color. Now, I do tend to try to paint the lightest portions first. So this I'd really consider more so the midtones that I'm adding at the moment. That really light wash of Payne's gray and the light washes of the Permanent Matter Deep at the beginning were my light wash, or my lights, and these are really more mediums, although it's kind of getting a little light there. But yeah, I like to just add it wherever I see it needs it while it's on my brush. And I just move around the area I'm working on doing that. You can see I used a little bit of the burnt umber up there by the eye, and I had a slight bit of Payne's gray mixed in with that burnt umber to get that kind of a grayish brownish tone. And here I actually started to mess up. I put down some Windsor red, and I really felt like that was too cool of a red for it. So I'm just blotting it out. There's a little bit of it stained on the paper, but that's not a problem. I'm just going to paint over that with the color red that I feel matches it better, which is Scarlet Lake. But I'm mixing a little bit of the Windsor yellow into it first to kind of make it more orangey. And I'm just adding it in. And you can see it covers up that really well. And then I'm going to have a little bit more concentrated Scarlet Lake with less of that Windsor yellow in it to do the lower portion. So this is really more of a, you know, actual Scarlet Lake color without the yellow. Nice thing about that is I just kind of laid it down, and it might have looked kind of jagged at first, but you can see that because it was all wet put down next to each other, those colors really just kind of mingled on their own and created a lovely effect there. Now, what you're going to see here is that I'm as far down with that red as I want to be. I don't want to go down further into the belly of the bird. So I'm actually going to be lifting color up rather than, because I want to soften that edge, but I don't want to drag the color down into the rest of the body. So I'm lifting it in upward swiping motions, and I'm wiping off that paint between each swipe. And that way I'm softening it without spreading that paint further down. And I don't want to lift all of it. I just want to soften it a bit and kind of soften it with the other colors that are there as well. And really, my brush is just wet at this point. It's clean, it's just wet. And I'm just kind of using it to spread those colors and incorporate them with each other, soften it rather than add anything new to it. And now we're darkening things up, and I'm adding some of the darker tones. Really, you want to have at least three tones in your paintings. You want to have lights, you want to have mediums, and you want to have darks. And I like to think about it as highlights, normal, you know, normal shading, what you would normally see the as it is, and then shadow. And I'm just switching between the burnt umber and the perylene violet. And I'm not worried about if they are getting mixed together. In fact, I kind of like it better when they do get a little bit mixed. And I'm using some of that to just kind of add in a little bit of feathers around the eye and the head of the bird. Now we're going in on the beak. Now, the beak of this bird is actually pretty dark, so I'm kind of getting it started right now. And you're going to see I take the outline of it pretty dark, and it really kind of helps create a rounded effect to the beak where you've kind of got the rounding of the top and the bottom on both sides. And I started with the Payne's Gray, but then I've gone in and I'm adding some Payne's Gray mixed with the burnt umber. I want to leave a little bit of a highlight on that beak. So it's darker around the edges, and then underneath the mouth, the opening on the beak, we're painting kind of a little bit of a mid tone there, and then leaving the top of the beak mostly light for the highlight. And now this is the part that I think really brings life into an, any of your paintings, and that is painting the eyes. I like to start out by outlining the eye, and I am using the Payne's Gray for this. I don't keep black on my palette. I use Payne's Gray as a black, as a substitute for black. I feel like it just looks a little bit more natural. Now, anytime I am doing eyes, I will usually attempt to leave two highlights, two little light, white spots on it. And particularly with birds, especially, I feel like for some reason, two highlights really adds a little bit more realism. Even if the source picture didn't have two highlights showing, I will still usually try to add it in that way. I don't know. For me, that's just what works. And I will actually go in here and add a little bit of just a slight tint of really washed out Payne's Gray around the edge of the eye. And you want to be careful with doing this because you don't want it to touch the areas where you've just laid down paint. It will bleed out. So if you're concerned that your hand isn't quite steady enough, wait for it to dry. Don't add it until it's dry. And I left a small gap. I don't know how obvious that is or how clearly you can see that, but I left a small gap between that darker area and then and that's how I did not get it to bleed into the surrounding area that I was working on. And here I actually made a mistake. I did not want to paint those little feet just yet. I should have waited until after I had done the branch. But I realized it and it was just a little too late to do anything about it. So I'm just going to work around it. And this is that cobalt turquoise. And you can see I've got it muddied up with whatever other colors are on my palette to just kind of make this muted, kind of almost green tinted color. And I'm using that for the moss on my branch. And you just want to put that on the tops, really, of your branch. I mean, if you want your branch to have it on the sides too, I suppose that's okay, but I think it looks a little bit more realistic in mine when I just lay the moss or lichens, I'm not sure what those are called, on the top of the branch. And then just start painting with your burnt umber around it. And I'm staying pretty light right now. I don't really want it to be real dark. I want it to, I'll go back through and I will add some darker tones as I go. You can see I'm kind of starting to add in a little bit of that now. But I'm being careful to still leave some of the lighter parts. I don't want to completely cover everything I've just done. With trees and branches, you really want it to be kind of splotchy because that's how they are. They've just got all of this wonderful modeling in them, and that's what makes it look realistic. Now I'm adding a little bit of darker area on the tree, on the branch below the bird, because I want it to kind of look like he's sitting there. I don't want him to not have a shadow. And then I'm just adding a little bit more darker tones as I go in other places as well. And I'm doing all of this while it's still wet, or at least damp, anyways. I'm not painting very, very wet. I'm painting more so in a damp style. For me, I feel like this is what works best. When I paint very wet, things just kind of, I don't know, I lose detail, and I prefer to paint in a more damp manner. See how many times I can say damp in this video. It's like a drinking game. Oh gosh. And now I'm just working on that little twig that's sticking off the branch. And I went in first and just painted the whole thing with that cobalt turquoise mud. And I'm just kind of highlighting the, not really highlighting, I'm like undershading, I guess. I don't know. Painting underneath it with the other, with the burnt umber, and I think there's a little bit of perylene violet or something mixed in there too. And it's just kind of like, I muddy my colors, and that's what works for me. And we're going to go in on that top branch. Now, this one, I want to kind of look like it's just a little bit further back than the branch that we just painted. The branch we painted is in the complete foreground with our bird, and it's supporting the bird. This one is just a little bit further back. It's still, kind of a focal point, but not really. It's framing our focal point. So I'm not going to give it quite as much detail as the branch below. And you can see I'm also using a darker color on this. So it's just a bit muddier. There's a little bit more of that Payne's gray mixed into my burnt umber. And I'm just kind of still painting it very light to begin with, but I'm not going to get nearly as detailed with this as what I did with my lower branch. I'll tell you, I think it's hard doing voiceovers. This is my first time doing it, and I feel like I want to talk through the whole thing. Oh, tell me how I'm doing. Should I just be quiet for part of this? Oh. And we've got a little bit more perylene violet in this part. This really is just kind of a use these colors and mix them as you go, kind of grab a little bit here and a little bit there. I'm putting in some of that burnt matter or ugh, that permanent matter deep right now. And I'm using that kind of like it's a nice shadow that's just kind of speckling in areas. All right. And I think this is pretty much done at this point. Now I'm just going to test that lower branch and make sure that everything's dry. And then I can add my signature. And for the signature, I like to use whatever colors I think are complementary to the picture. You know, something that I've already been using in the picture is what I like to do for my signature in. And there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you painted along with me and you would like to send in a picture of your work, I would love to see it. My email address is in the description box below, and so is all the information of the different supplies that I used. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.